Welcome back to another True Crime Wednesday. Tonight we're going back to an oldie, but a goldie. We're going to be going and discussing the David Crowley case, or as many have come to know it, the murder of the Gray State. The family was allegedly they were killed allegedly by David Crowley himself. Now, that's what the narrative wants to tell you. That's what it wants you to see. But I'm here to show, and it won't take long, that the data itself shows it's impossible for David Crowley to have actually committed the act, and that he was actually the first to go. Now, it gets a little odd, but a lot of people, when they look at a case, they like to go and discuss, okay, well, were there insects at the scene? Were there flies? Oh, there wasn't any flies? Well, then they must have just been freshly killed. No. A lot of people look at this case that take that route. Forget one thing. The temperature outside, regardless of the temperature on the inside of the house, the flies would have had to have been carried in, right? They would have been pupa, or they would have been larvae somewhere inside the home. But even then, they couldn't be too close to the door, the back door that was open a little bit. It was open like a quarter of an inch. That was enough that could have killed maggots and pupa. In fact, it could have killed the flies. The breeze it would have been too cold. It would have been like essentially an instant death for them. However, there is one type of data that crime scene investigators like to go and look at. And that is actually forensic mycology, or the study of fungus at the crime scene. Now, what's interesting about this and why this is actually applicable is because mycology, or the study of fungus and everything, they actually start digging into temperatures that are actually very, very low, lower than where an insect can actually survive. So it can actually get pretty cold when looking at the data sometimes. Fungus can exist at temperatures that are far lower than what a fly can exist at. On top of that, it can also exist at a temperature that arguably a fly could die from as well. Now, this is where things get a little interesting, because we know that the thermostat was set to 60 degrees and all this. And we know all these details about the Crowley case. But what I want you guys to explore, and like I said, this is an oldie but a goldie, because this can apply to multiple cases. Yeah, this is a Murder of the Gray State episode, but this also is going to be used on other cases as we progress, especially ones that take place in winter months in colder areas. I do have a few in mind I'd like to go and look at here pretty soon, but it's going to take some time to go and get set up, especially with my newer work schedule and all this. So, and especially with everything that's kind of going on with production right now. But for tonight, let's go and delve into this for hopefully about the next 10 minutes. So, is forensic mycology actually noteworthy? Well, I've already stated it is, but we're going to go and I want you guys to really see where I'm coming from here. So, according to the report, the fungal growth on a corpse, a case report, it plays a role in the determination of the time of death, burial place, and time of leaving the body where it was found, and cause of death, including hallucination and poisoning. Okay, now this is important here, because what was David allegedly using or consuming? Which is absinthe, right? Which, if you're getting pure absinthe, what are you getting? Something that is going to be hallucinatory, right? And in a way, it kind of poisons you, because once again, it is an alcohol. But, that being said, forensic mycology is considered an auxiliary method in the determination of the time of death, just like forensic entomology. It's actually used if there are no insects at the scene, or if there is no Or if there was no insects to the scene, say for instance, temperatures instantly drop, bam, kills all these insects, what happens? Well, you can't really use it anymore, right? Well, forensic mycology continues on. And forensic mycology will actually be there pretty much irregardless. There's very, very few ways to actually stop the fungal growth, but that would have to be manually done. The body couldn't actually just do this. So no matter what, there will be mold, there will be fungal growth, there will be all sorts of mycology to be studied. According to the report, Fungal Microbiota Dynamics as a Postmortem Investigation Tool, focus on Aspergillus, Penicillium, and Candida species. Determination of the fungal groups to help establish the time of death. That's the part I want you guys to really focus on, that little highlighted area there. That's what this is used for. Okay? And this is actually a little more accurate in a lot of cases than forensic entomology. Forensic entomology, you can look at there's too much eaten away. There's depending on the insects or the larvae that are there, it can actually change the whole chemical composition of things. It can make it so it seems like it's a little farther along, or maybe it's not as far back, or maybe it's farther back. So it can adjust the time. Now, however, if you've got the right kind of insects there and all this, and entomology can definitely provide, I would argue, a closer time of death than even forensic mycology could, but you have to have essentially the perfect setup. With forensic mycology, you don't necessarily have to have the perfect setup. You can actually just go and study fungal growth, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, this is how long this takes. It doesn't. It's a lot simpler to go at forensic mycology than it is entomology. Additionally, from the report Forensic Mycology Current Perspectives, determination of postmortem intervals for mold growth on corpses, psychoactive substances and toxins, hazards from mold growth in buildings, and providing trace evidence linking people, objects with places. That's what this is used for. Okay? Just keep those three things in mind, and we're going to continue on. So David Crowley's autopsy report. Now, we're going to go over his and Raniya's, because they're the only ones that actually show any data on the mold. However, now this is where things take a little bit of an interesting turn. We know there was mold on Komel, and that we know that was also underneath her her corset. You can see it in the photos. I'm not going to show these, so for those that are really gung-ho about trying to get those, there's plenty of places you can find them, just you're not going to get them from me, all right? So, but there are photos out there, yes, that do show the bodies, and you can clearly see the mold growth underneath her corset. There's just, and when we're talking about mold at the underneath the corset, it's just there's an area where you can see the body had been moved, and you can see a little bit, and bam, there's mold. That being said, it can also be seen on Raniya. Now here's where things get a little interesting here. We know that it's seen, or it's not seen on David. That's because his clothes really aren't really ruffled up anywhere and all this, and it's where it's at. His clothes aren't lifted from those areas, so we don't know what kind of mold growth there would be on his body on the outside. But we know that it's not mentioned on the inside of Komel. So this is the part we want to go and take note on. 720 gram liver has an intact, smooth capsule with post-mortem mold growth. Bam. We don't need to go pay attention to the rest of the stuff a whole lot. We see there's mold growth on the inside. That's what we need to pay attention to right now. Next, we have Raniya's. The 190 gram liver has an intact, smooth capsule with post-mortem mold-like growth. Same exact thing that David's has got. Okay. So just a little perspective. This comes from Forensic Mycology, a Current Perspective, which is back in 2015. A young woman was found dead in a flat in West Yorkshire in January 1996. The forensic pathologist noted that there was some mummification and skin slippage. and it was necessary to determine how long the woman had been dead before her body was discovered. There were bluish-green and grey mold colonies present, and the West Yorkshire Police Support Service took swabs from these, and then measured the sizes of the bluish-green colonies. Over a period of 28 days, an experienced medical mycologist studied the growth rates of the fungi onto artificial media at a temperature similar to those where the body was found, which is about 4 degrees Celsius, okay? Now, there's going to be some conversions here because a lot of the data that was provided concerning forensic mycology, it's done in Celsius rather than in Fahrenheit. And at room temperature, which is roughly about 21 degrees Celsius to 24 degrees Celsius. After comparing the growth rates, the mycologist concluded that death occurred a minimum of 3 to 4 weeks prior to January 16, 1996, when the area of growth on the right cheek was measured. They were able to determine time of death. Okay, now you can see minimum, right? They're saying, okay, well, it couldn't have been any sooner than this. It had to have been around this time, or around this, nothing later than that. So it couldn't have been close to our time, right? So I did the conversions for everybody here. I know my conversions are a little off on this. This is a little dated, so just bear with me here. There will be more going over in the main video, and I know I've been saying it for almost 2 years now. It's ridiculous. But so we're looking at test 1 here. This is from that story, right? 4 degrees Celsius. What is that? Well, you convert that. That's 39.2 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, interesting about that. You got test 2 that they showed, 20 to 24 degrees Celsius. That comes out to 68 to 75.2 degrees Fahrenheit. Funny how the Crowley residence thermostat was at 68 degrees. So now, we know that could this be a similar fungal growth? Possibly. Now, it's got to be able to grow at that same temperature here, the 68 degrees, as that's what the house was set at. However, the bodies themselves would be cooler. They wouldn't necessarily be at 68 degrees, but with that constant temperature, it's going to be, the bodies would actually be closer to that temperature. Now, with no insects present, it's going to be down, the bodies are going to be decomposed strictly through bacteria and different types of fungi, molds, fungus, things like that. So just remember that that report, the Forensic Mycology Current Perspectives, done in 2015, actually did conclude with, they did find the guy who killed the woman. So this could be actually used to figure out who killed David and his family. So let's break down the data. What does it mean here? Now this is at face value here, and I've already covered the first one here, but what can be determined at face value from this information? Well, the order of deaths. Now, you could either say Raniya died first or David. Now, this depends on how much mold growth there was, but also when it comes down to it, it wasn't really measured. Now, with David, we can't really measure it. They didn't give a big enough clue as to how much mold there was on David. That being said, we can actually measure Raniya's because we can see clearly where the mold has grown. So, but based on this, we could say potentially that it was either Raniya or David that had died first. But it seems pretty clear to me Raniya did. But it all ended with Komel. Now, the time of each death can be closely approximated based on growth data, which we got from there as well. Now, it can be very, very close depending on the mold growth. There's some mold that it'll start growing pretty quickly. And then it'll kind of, if there's a lot of temperature fluctuation, which there would be a little bit, that it could potentially sway this a little bit. It could be even up to a couple days. But likelihood, because of everything there, it should be around the 68 degrees. It's not going to differ too much. It just depends on how often that the furnace is kicking on. And how close the bodies were to the furnace. However, that being said, we know the bodies weren't too far off. And the cool breeze would have been blocked a bit from getting to the bodies, but the underside would not have been, it would have been a little more vulnerable. So, But that's what we've got tonight. So this is something I want you guys to pay close attention to. I want you guys to keep a focus on this, because it plays a big part in the David Crowley case and the murder of the Gray State, with the Crowley family murders, however you guys deem it. It plays a huge, huge factor here. There's a lot that does, but this is something that gives us a bit more data on when they died. Now, with that being said, then we can actually start determining some things, because we know that through the phone records and the timeline, we know their computer was used after they had passed on. And we know that David didn't do it. And you can also look, there's other avenues to go and also look at, but we know that the phone records also show a different story as well, and so do the internet search, so does the internet search history.